there's a strange assumption we carry, almost unconsciously, that the loudest person in the room is the strongest one. The one who talks the most, who dominates conversations, who asserts their presence with volume and certainty. We look at that person and we think, that's power. We think confidence must be visible, must be heard, must be proven in real time. But if you look closely, really closely, you'll start to notice something unsettling. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one who says the least. And that's not because they have nothing to say. It's because they don't need to prove anything. Silence, when it's intentional, is not emptiness. It's control. Think about it. When someone reacts instantly to everything, every opinion, every criticism, every situation, they are not in control. They are being controlled. Controlled by emotion, by impulse, by the need to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. But the silent one, the one who pauses, who observes, who doesn't rush to fill the space with words, that person is operating from a completely different place. They are not reacting, they are choosing. And there is a massive difference between reacting and choosing. Because when you react, the world dictates your behavior. But when you choose, you dictate your response to the world. The silent person understands this. They understand that not every moment requires their voice. Not every opinion needs to be shared. Not every challenge deserves an immediate answer. They've learned something most people never do. Power is not in expression. It's in restraint. Now, this doesn't mean they're passive. It doesn't mean they're weak. In fact, it's the opposite. It takes far more strength to hold your words than to release them impulsively. Anyone can speak. Anyone can interrupt. Anyone can raise their voice. But very few people can sit in silence, fully aware, fully present, and completely in control of themselves. That kind of silence is not absence. It's presence at its highest level. Because while others are busy talking, they are busy understanding. They are reading the room. They are watching patterns. They are noticing things that others miss because they're too focused on being noticed themselves. And over time, that awareness compounds. It builds into something sharp, something precise, something powerful. And that's why they become dangerous. Not dangerous in a destructive sense, but dangerous in the sense that they cannot be easily manipulated, easily shaken, or easily predicted. You see, predictability is weakness. If people can predict how you'll react, they can control how you behave. If they know you'll get angry at certain words, they can use those words to control you. If they know you'll seek approval, they can withhold it to influence you. If they know you need to be heard, they can silence you by simply ignoring you. But the silent person breaks this pattern because they don't give you immediate access to their reactions. They don't reveal everything they're thinking. They don't expose every emotion the moment it appears. They create space between stimulus and response. And in that space, they gain power. Because in that space, they decide. They decide whether something is worth their energy. They decide whether a response is necessary. They decide how they want to show up instead of letting the situation decide for them. That's discipline. And discipline is dangerous because once someone masters themselves, the external world loses its grip on them. And let's be honest, that kind of person is rare. Most people are constantly trying to be understood, constantly trying to be validated, constantly trying to prove their worth through words. They talk to fill the silence because silence makes them uncomfortable. Silence forces reflection. It forces you to confront your thoughts, your insecurities, your doubts. And that's why so many people avoid it. But the silent person doesn't avoid it. They've made peace with it. They've learned to sit with themselves without needing distraction, without needing noise, without needing constant stimulation. And that inner stillness becomes their foundation. Because when you are comfortable in silence, you are no longer dependent on the outside world to define your state. You become steady. And a steady person is incredibly hard to disrupt. Imagine being in a situation where everyone else is reacting emotionally, anger, frustration, fear, and there's one person who remains calm, composed, silent. Who do you think has the advantage? The one who is overwhelmed or the one who is observing? The one who is speaking without thinking or the one who is thinking before speaking? The answer is obvious. Because clarity comes from stillness, not chaos. And the silent person protects their clarity at all costs. They don't rush decisions. They don't let emotions dictate their actions. They don't feel the need to respond immediately just to prove they're present. They understand that timing matters. And sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. That's what makes them unpredictable. And unpredictability creates leverage. Because when people don't know how you'll respond, they can't easily influence you. And when they can't influence you, they start to respect you or fear you. Now here's where it gets even deeper. Silence doesn't just give you control over others, it gives you control over yourself. Because every time you choose not to react impulsively, you strengthen a part of you that most people neglect. You strengthen your ability to pause. And that pause is everything. That pause is the difference between saying something you regret and saying something that matters. That pause is the difference between escalating a situation and diffusing it. That pause is the difference between being controlled and being in control. And over time, that pause becomes instinct. It becomes who you are. You stop chasing every argument. You stop responding to every criticism. You stop needing to prove yourself in every conversation. And something interesting happens when you stop trying to prove yourself. People start seeing your value without you saying a word, because confidence that needs to announce itself is not real confidence. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need constant reinforcement. It just is. And people feel that. They may not be able to explain it, but they feel it. They feel the presence of someone who doesn't need to compete for attention. They feel the calm of someone who is not easily shaken. They feel the strength of someone who doesn't need to speak to be heard. And that's when silence becomes influence. Because when you do speak, when you finally choose to break that silence, people listen, not because you're loud, but because you're intentional. Not because you talk often, but because you talk with purpose. Your words carry weight because they are not wasted. And that's the paradox. The less you speak, the more powerful your words become. Now, this doesn't mean you should never speak. It means you should speak with intention. It means you should choose your moments. It means you should understand that your voice is a tool, not a reflex. Because when your voice becomes a reflex, it loses its power. But when it becomes a choice, it gains impact. And the silent person understands this better than anyone. They understand that influence is not about dominating conversations, it's about shaping them. It's about knowing when to step in and when to step back. It's about recognizing that sometimes the strongest statement you can make is saying nothing at all. Because silence forces others to reveal themselves. When you don't rush to fill the gap, people start talking more. They start exposing their thoughts, their intentions, their weaknesses. And without realizing it, they give you information. And information is power. While they are trying to be heard, you are learning. While they are reacting, you are understanding. And over time, that understanding gives you an edge that cannot be faked. Because it's built on observation, not assumption. It's built on patience, not impulse. It's built on control, not chaos. And that's why the silent person becomes dangerous. Not because they are aggressive, but because they are precise. Not because they dominate, but because they understand. Not because they react, but because they choose. And in a world where most people are driven by noise, distraction, and constant reaction, that kind of presence stands out. It stands out in a way that doesn't need to announce itself. It stands out in a way that commands attention without demanding it. It stands out in a way that shifts the entire dynamic of a room without a single word being spoken. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where you feel the urge to react instantly, to speak immediately, to prove your point right away, pause. Ask yourself, am I reacting or am I choosing? Because that question alone can change everything. And if you can build the habit of choosing over reacting, of observing over interrupting, of thinking over speaking, you start to develop something most people never will. You start to develop quiet power. And quiet power is the most dangerous kind of power there is, because it doesn't need permission. It doesn't need recognition. It doesn't need noise. It simply exists, and when it finally reveals itself, it's undeniable. And if you stay with this idea long enough, you begin to notice something subtle but powerful unfolding in your life. The less you chase attention, the less you feel the need to announce yourself. The less you try to prove your value in every room you enter, the more people begin to feel your presence without you forcing it. Because attention that is chased is often resisted, but attention that is earned quietly tends to linger. Most people walk into a room asking, how do I stand out? But the question that changes everything is, how do I become someone worth noticing without asking for it? And the answer doesn't lie in louder words or bigger gestures. It lies in the quiet discipline of who you are when no one is watching. Consistency in small daily reflections creates unshakable mental strength over time. Not dramatic changes, not sudden transformations. Small, repeated moments where you choose to step back and examine yourself. Where you ask, why did I react that way? What triggered me? What could I have done better? These moments seem insignificant in isolation. They don't look impressive. They don't get applause. No one congratulates you for sitting alone and thinking deeply about your own behavior. But this is where the shift begins. Because when you consistently reflect, you begin to see patterns. Patterns in your emotions, patterns in your decisions, patterns in the way you respond to pressure, to criticism, to uncertainty. And once you see those patterns, you gain the ability to change them. And that's where mental strength is built. Not in the big moments where everyone is watching, but in the quiet moments where you are refining yourself, correcting yourself, and holding yourself accountable without needing external validation. This kind of discipline does something powerful. It removes the need for constant external approval. Because you are no longer relying on others to tell you who you are. You are actively shaping that identity yourself, day by day, thought by thought, decision by decision. And when you no longer need approval, you stop chasing attention. Because attention is often a substitute for validation. Think about how many times people speak just to be acknowledged. How many times they interrupt, exaggerate, or dominate conversations just to feel seen. It's not always about the message. It's about the feeling of being recognized. But when you build yourself internally through reflection, that need begins to fade. You don't need to prove your intelligence in every discussion. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to be the center of every conversation. You become comfortable stepping back. And when you step back, something interesting happens. You start to observe more than you express. You notice tone, body language, inconsistencies, unspoken tension. You pick up on things that are invisible to those who are too busy trying to be heard. And over time, this awareness sharpens your judgment. You begin to understand people on a deeper level, not just what they say, but why they say it. Not just what they do, but what drives them to do it. And that understanding becomes influence, because influence is not about controlling people. It's about understanding them well enough to connect, to guide, to lead without force. And you cannot truly understand people if you are constantly trying to be the one speaking. So the less you seek attention, the more space you create to understand. And the more you understand, the more effective your actions become. This is where most people get it wrong. They think influence comes from visibility, from being everywhere, speaking constantly, showing up louder and more frequently than everyone else. But visibility without depth is temporary. It might get you noticed for a moment, but it doesn't create lasting impact. Depth, on the other hand, is built quietly. It's built through reflection, through learning, through observing, through choosing growth over immediate recognition. And when depth meets the right moment, it doesn't just get attention, it holds it. Because people can sense when someone is grounded, when someone has substance, when someone is not just reacting but thinking. And that kind of presence is rare. Now imagine combining this with consistency. Not occasional reflection, not random moments of self-awareness, but a daily habit of checking in with yourself. A daily habit of asking hard questions. A daily habit of refining your thoughts, your actions, your responses. At first it feels small, almost insignificant. But over time it compounds. Just like physical training strengthens the body, mental reflection strengthens the mind. And eventually you reach a point where your reactions are no longer automatic. You don't get pulled into every emotional wave. You don't get distracted by every opinion. You don't get shaken by every challenge. Because you've trained yourself to pause. And that pause becomes your power. Now connect this back to attention. When you are constantly reacting, constantly speaking, constantly trying to prove yourself, you are giving away your energy. You are scattering your focus across too many things. But when you become selective, when you choose when to engage, when to speak, when to step forward, you conserve that energy. And concentrated energy is powerful. It's the difference between noise and signal. Noise is constant, loud, and easily ignored. Signal is precise, intentional, and impossible to overlook. And when you stop seeking attention, you move from noise to signal. Because your presence becomes deliberate. Your words become measured. Your actions become aligned with your values, not your impulses. And people start to notice, not because you demanded their attention, but because your behavior stands out from the chaos. They notice that you don't react the way others do. They notice that you don't get drawn into unnecessary conflicts. They notice that when you speak, it carries weight. And slowly, without forcing anything, influence begins to grow. It grows in the way people listen to you. It grows in the way people trust your judgment. It grows in the way your presence affects the room, even when you're not saying much. But none of this happens overnight. It's built through those small daily reflections, through those moments where you choose to improve rather than impress, where you choose to understand rather than react, where you choose to build depth rather than chase visibility. And this is where the real transformation takes place. Because as your inner world becomes more stable, your outer behavior becomes more intentional. You stop needing to fill every silence. You stop needing to respond to every opinion. You stop needing to prove your worth in every interaction. And in that space, you become more focused, more aware, more controlled, and ultimately more influential. Because influence is not about being everywhere. It's about being effective where it matters. It's about showing up with clarity, with purpose, with intention. And that only comes from a mind that has been trained through reflection. A mind that has been disciplined through consistency. A mind that is not easily shaken by external noise. So while others are chasing attention, you are building strength. While others are trying to be seen, you are learning to see clearly. While others are reacting, you are refining. And over time, that difference becomes impossible to ignore. Because people may be drawn to noise initially, but they stay for substance. They stay for clarity. They stay for presence. And presence cannot be faked. It is built quietly, consistently, Over time, through small daily reflections that shape the way you think, the way you respond, the way you carry yourself in every situation. And when that presence is fully developed, it doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to compete. It doesn't need to chase. It simply exists in a way that naturally draws people in. Because in a world full of noise, clarity is rare. And in a world full of attention-seeking, quiet confidence stands out without effort. So the real question is not how to get more attention. The real question is how to become someone who no longer needs it. Because the moment you stop needing attention is the moment you stop being controlled by it. And the moment you stop being controlled by it is the moment you begin to influence it, not by force, not by volume, but by presence, consistency, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing exactly who you are and choosing every single day to become even stronger than you were the day before.